Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse, and this is episode 132. In today's episode, I interview Melissa Talwar, Executive Director of the Support Fibromyalgia Network. We're talking about the amazing work they're doing advocating for fibromyalgia funding. You're probably aware of the need for more funding for research to help us come up with new treatments. But did you realize that this funding also changes how your doctor is educated? Research can absolutely uncover new potential treatments, but more importantly, it shapes how our providers are taught and what they are taught. Evidence-based medicine means that your doctor is practicing medicine that is based on evidence. And that's what we want, right? We don't want our doctors to be practicing medicine with something that may or may not even work. The evidence comes through research. Right now, we still don't know exactly what causes fibromyalgia. We can see pieces of the puzzle, brain inflammation. We know there's an immune system component. We've seen changes in how the brain processes pain, extra nerve endings in the hands of fibro patients. We've seen a lot of these little details, but we still don't have a definitive cause or a clear treatment protocol that everyone can follow. We don't even know what specialists to go see when we need a diagnosis. Fibromyalgia falls under the American College of Rheumatology and is often lumped in with arthritis. Other medical organizations are non-committal and don't categorize us at all, so we're an illness without a home. Melissa even shares in our interview that one of the classes she's taking in nursing school is teaching future nurses that fibromyalgia is a psychological illness. It is not. So it's no surprise then that a nurse that you see someday in the future is going to think that fibromyalgia is a mental illness. It's what they were taught. So research and advocating for research funding is what is going to change this and uncover answer to these questions and help ensure that our providers are properly trained. Now, please make sure and stay tuned after my interview with Melissa. There are a few other episodes I want to highlight that cover similar topics, things on research, on funding for research, and I'll share those with you at the end. I'll also have, of course, our listener shout out and information on upcoming events for Fibromyalgia Awareness Day, other ways you can get involved. Now, let me introduce you to our guest. Melissa Talwar is the Executive Director of the Support Fibromyalgia Network, a national nonprofit dedicated to empowering individuals with fibromyalgia. In addition to being a graduate of our Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor training, Melissa is a board-certified functional medicine health coach with additional certifications from Dr. Walls, Dr. Bredesen, Dr. Karazian, functional nutrition, a master's in clinical neuroscience, and she currently leads coaching for a statewide group medical visits functional medicine campaign. Melissa is an award-winning health coach and a fervent patient advocate. A steadfast commitment to patient and medical education, collaborative care, research advancement, and advocacy training marks her leadership at the Support Fibromyalgia Network. Under her guidance, the Support Fibromyalgia Network has become a pivotal source of empowerment, mentorship, and transformative change within the fibromyalgia community. Here's my conversation with Melissa. Hi, Melissa. I'm so excited to have you share about Support Fibro here on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tami. It's been a long time and I'm excited to be here.
I know it has. We both have been, have had a few things going on, so I'm excited to share some of that. I think a great place to start, you and I have known each other, oh God, how long has it been? I know it was way back in the days when I was running a support group, back, I think before I even wrote my book, my first book, I think. Yes. Probably. Yeah, so that's been a minute. That's been probably 10 years or so. And obviously a lot has changed in that time. So let's talk a little bit about what is the Support Fibromyalgia Network and how did that come to be?
Well, it has been a while, but things haven't changed with my personality. So, as we talked and met early on, within the fibromyalgia community, I've always been like, okay, how can I help? Well, how can I provide service to fibromyalgia patients? And that's always been the goal. And in 2016, I was kind of on this journey because my health was getting super bad. And I started to meet other patient advocates on the road, trying to figure out if there were other tools that I needed to use. And had a chance of meeting some other advocates, and we teamed up to form the Support Fibromyalgia Network. Now, I did not want to get involved with a nonprofit organization at all at this level, but our goal was at that time was to fill in the gaps, whatever that kind of meant, focusing on youth groups because I got diagnosed at 14 years old. We had veterans involved, men with fibromyalgia. So we were kind of looking at those components. And it's shifted. It has gone completely into other directions. And what we've sort of adopted is more now this transformative change, systemic stuff that hadn't gotten addressed, which we didn't even know about. So things like advocacy, which is something we never wanted to get involved with at the time because we didn't understand it. We had never been to Capitol Hill before in the same way. Advancing research was something that I was always intrigued about and I wanted to do, and medical education. But it seems like in order to add these aspects, we have to create a much better like systemic transformation for fibromyalgia. So that's where we've kind of evolved into at this point.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, it's kind of like when I started coaching. If I had known that, I was going to create the institute, podcast, like all the things, like I don't know if I would have gotten started, right? Like it's a lot. But as you learn and as you grow and as you see what needs to be done, right? It just
We
changes.
dove in full force. And I think as I was able to reclaim my health in 2017, I was starting to get more involved. My big thing was medical education. I wanted to get these doctors like educated, but there's a lot of challenges with that. There's barriers. There's research. You need to have the research in order to train the doctors. So it's this tangled web that gets involved with the system. And then I know we sent a press release to Court Johnson, and his reply back wasn't, he's like, well, that's great and all that you're doing all these kind of service related stuff. But if you really want to tackle research, you're going to have to tackle advocacy. So I won't forget that. And he was sent me some links for some other organizations that are doing that. And that was this, oh my goodness, how are we even going to do this part? He's probably right somewhere, and I read all his blogs to understand what the challenges were, but it was scary for us to take that on in 2019. Very scary.
So, just so everybody's on the same page, let's describe what you mean when you say the word advocacy, right? Because there's lots of ways that we advocate for ourselves, right? Like telling my family, no, I need to sit down, I can't continue. That is a form of advocacy, but that is not what you're talking about.
That's a great point because we provide education and services for patients to be better advocates in like a clinical care with their family and friends. So this type of advocacy is geared towards federal advocacy. So we are talking to our congressional leaders about some of the circumstances, what's going on in the fibromyalgia community, our needs, and especially address the lack of funding for fibromyalgia research at the NIH, which is a huge one that hadn't been very apparent to us. But when you do a deeper dive, we have definitely been neglected in the fibromyalgia community on how much is getting funded, how the research is funded, who's getting funded, and what these grants are opening up for, with the need to translate this type of research into patient care. So we're talking about federal advocacy. We do work with other groups that do state level advocacy or other larger federal advocacy issues. So this is when we're addressing like insurance, disability rights. So in that case, we team up with other organizations. But when we go to the Hill and I'm talking about fibromyalgia advocacy, we're talking about federal changes, federal legislation.
Yes. And I can see why that might be a little bit intimidating.
It is at first, but if you talk to people that have actually joined us, I know it's nerve-wracking with your first meeting, but when you talk to some of the other people that have been with us, they really end up enjoying it at the end, and you do feel heard. And that's the point. I think that's the understanding that we all miss. Our congressional representatives represent us. So this is part of the actual process that we need to do, and your voices are heard as patients. And it does make a difference and it does matter. And to let everybody know, our reps do see that there's something wrong with what's going on with fibromyalgia, and they're happy that we're there and they tell us to continue doing what we're doing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And for you listening, And for you listening, we are going to have a couple, Anne and Lily, who joined Melissa on the Hill. That was just last month, I think, wasn't it? They're going to come share their
Weeks ago.
Just a couple weeks ago as we record this, yes. So they'll be on in another couple of episodes to share their experience. So if y'all want to hear from people who were actually there, it'll be coming in a few weeks. So yeah. So let's back up a little bit and talk about, I think people don't really realize how I don't know, it's kind of like trying to turn the Titanic or something, right? Like, this is a very long, very involved process. We can look out there and say, I wish my doctor knew more about fibromyalgia. But in order for your doctor to do and to know more and to be able to treat you, there is like years worth of work that has to happen first.
Absolutely. And many of us have that challenges of looking for doctors. Why doesn't our doctor understand how to treat fibromyalgia? And again, going back to systemic changes here up above. So we're looking at even American like medical board systems, but they're looking at public health agencies. So this is the long game and the systemic changes and some of the issues that we uncovered doing this advocacy. So right now, currently, the CDC thinks fibromyalgia is an arthritic condition. So all the data, the surveillance data on fibromyalgia is combined with arthritis in every public health agency in the state.
So to be clear, y'all, it is not.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know.
So across the board, everybody disagrees, and this is problematic. So the CDC is saying arthritic condition. NIH won't commit. They say it's not an arthritic condition. They do admit there's neural pathways, the nervous system is involved, but they're very non-committal on the category. And then you see other, American College of Rheumatology. So they're kind of like, okay, this is not musculoskeletal, this is more looking like neurological. So we don't know. And so they can't train their medical providers accordingly. And then rheumatologists are not given the tools they need. So now they're referring to primary care and pain specialists. But people have to remember that primary care historically has never really been included in the education for fibromyalgia. We've never done widespread primary care education, medical education.
Yep.
So these are the systemic changes we're talking about. And this is why it's challenging, because we need these public agencies to change. And they're coming back to us and like, well, we need the research in order to give you the right category. So this goes back to why we're advocating for an increased funding at the NIH for that research. Obviously, we could do philanthropic fundraising and drive that directly to the researchers, which is something we've been talking a lot about because of the long game, but the NIH funds so much research. So that's what we go to Capitol Hill to advocate, open up these grants to get that pathophysiology, that category, confirmed with fibromyalgia.
Right, because right now it's almost like everybody thinks it's somebody else's problem, yes. Right?
And this is why we need the patients to rally, because it's falling on our laps. And we're the ones having to learn all the science and the medical jargon to teach our providers. And so there's a huge gap. And I do think our medical providers really do care. They just haven't been given these tools. Science isn't translating into their medical clinics. So it's a lot to take on. And I understand that. But I do believe that if we all come together and can work together, including our medical providers, we do need them on the Hill with us because there is a different rapport. We've
Mhm.
noticed when an MD shows up in the meetings to help us. So gathering it together, I really do think we can make these changes. And as I mentioned, with being diagnosed in 1995, I want to change this super fast. I can't wait another decade because we're seeing generations now being affected. We had people go with us in the Hill that were 30s, 20s, 14 years old, as you'll hear from Lily. We got to change it for the next generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's amazing to me how we've all been kind of limping along, right? Like we've been doing the best we can with what we've got, right? Our doctors are doing the best they can with what they have. Fibromyalgia is one of the top 10 diagnoses in primary care, but they're not taught what to do with it. Right. So just thinking about Oregon Health and Science University, I go speak there a couple times a year, part of their pain intercession classes. And they usually will have a 1 hour class, usually, not always. And most places don't even have that, right? So we've got to change a lot of things, and it starts farther out than you would think. I know a lot of fibro patients are really interested in we need more research because they're thinking we need more treatments. But the thing is there actually are treatments that are effective. I see it all the time, people getting better. It's just that our doctors don't know about it because the research isn't there, the funding isn't there. Like it's just not supported.
And there's a lot of barriers to medical education requiring that evidence-based research. And I know there's subsets of sort of fibromyalgia medical providers that are teaching what they feel works best. And so we see that, but we definitely need a collective gathering of minds in the medical community to come together in order to figure this out and help, based on case-based learning and develop this out as we're trying to work to get some of this research going for different things. But the classification is a huge issue. But I'm
Yeah.
excited with the neuroinflammation research coming out, showing brain inflammation in multiple areas of the brain. And
That's
this is
not
why,
arthritis, y'all.
no. So the systemic, if the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system are involved with this, then we're looking at a different classification.
Yes,
And
we
this
are.
is this is systemic inflammation. But even though the idea is you may not have inflammation in your joints per se, it's all, but we need this type of research to come out, and that's
Hmm.
what we're fighting for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned before we started recording that you even ran across someone calling fibromyalgia a psychiatric disorder.
Yes, I'm currently in clinical courses for nursing, and fibromyalgia is categorized as a psychiatric disorder. I had to like close my laptop. I was so irritated because I wrote the, professor, even though it's asynchronous. I was like, when was this made? In the 1970s? Like, what is this? Like, this is how I was treated in the 1990s. And so we've evolved, we've gone past that, or at least I thought we did. But this is the type of training that medical professionals are receiving right now. So we need that to drastically change.
Absolutely. And is it any wonder then that when we, see those nurses that are being trained with that textbook, right? And we see them in an office, is it any wonder they look at us funny, right?
And it's also a huge issue for what it gets prescribed, and a lot of
Yes.
what's happening and side effects that don't get discussed for certain lines of medication, and a blanket statement across the board for training. And that's, again, that just goes back to the systemic change, but it's all these different variables that we're trying to transform for the fibromyalgia community. And
Hmm.
it is a lot of work, but getting involved is truly something that we see passionate people getting involved in, and you can do a little bit that make go it goes a long way.
So when you're talking about people getting involved and doing a little bit, this doesn't necessarily mean going to Washington, D.C., although it could mean that, right? But what are some of the things that people can do to help change this?
There's a lot of levels to this, and I've learned to talk in different ways because I know I'm more on the advocacy front, medical education. But as you've mentioned, there's ways for people to feel better. So, what we try to do is support other people doing that work at different levels. Not everybody wants to get into advocacy. So, other things like creative art projects, we do actually send resources to support groups, or we share information on what's going on with other support groups. There's a lot of creative art therapies. I know we talk about Elaine Merrifield all the time that loves this creative play. So these are aspects that people can enjoy. And then for those that, are in this warrior stance like I am, there are avenues for advocacy. We encourage researchers. So right now, if we're trying to develop more new generation of researchers to get involved as much as possible as well. So support your researchers. This might be a big fundraising component that comes up this year as we talk about it, maybe to drive that value directly to the research that we want. So all these neuroinflammation labs that we're talking about, we've definitely had a discussion on fundraising for them. So if people love to fundraise or want to get involved in that capacity, that is definitely a huge need right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Definitely. And I just had a thought and I lost it. Shoot. I'm going back over what you just said. It's gone. Okay. So give me a second and we'll go in a different direction. Okay. So I know you guys were just in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. Tell us about that. I know we're going to hear from Anne and Lily about their experience, but I know there was a lot of work that happened before anybody ever got there. So tell us how you set that up and what the goal was and just kind of how that worked.
This trip again goes back to the increase of funding for fibromyalgia specific research at the NIH, and we're working on things called an appropriations request. So we need to get these appropriation requests in before the deadline. We speak to the offices, we let them know we're writing this appropriations request to request additional funding for fibromyalgia specific research. We let them know about the problems, we bring updated research, and we set up these meetings. So we have to schedule the meetings. Of course, we took this time team leads. So these were team leaders that have worked with us in the past doing a lot of virtual meetings and already secured that because we were very specific on the offices we need to meet with. And so that's what we do. We give them the information, we update them, and then we continue building relationships. So some of these meetings we've met with these offices now for a few years. So we're keeping up the relationships as much as possible. There is a high turnover in staff, which makes it challenging. Or when the elected officials move out of place or they move around, it also makes it challenging to keep up the relationships. But we're trying to encourage people to meet with their congressional representatives. So these are House of Congress or senators more on a regular basis, attend their events. When you can, talk to them about healthcare issues. We encourage people to get involved with some other organizations too that do advocacy and legislation. So after fibromyalgia, I was involved with the Alliance for Headache Disorders. So I was talking about advocacy for headache disorders as well. So we encourage that part too. Patients Rising does a lot of healthcare policy legislation. So we're talking about barriers to insurance, co-pays, copay accumulators, all of that. So that's a part of it too. But for fibromyalgia specifically, this time we're back in person. It was a while since we went. We kind of did one-off meetings in person and we did a lot of virtual training. So during the pandemic, it was all virtual. And then we were able to take over 100 meetings with a lot of people and bring people in and train people to get used to sharing their story, telling and explaining what we need for the fibromyalgia community, which is huge. And these meetings may last maybe 15 minutes. It seems like a lot of preparation for 15 minutes, but it makes a big impact when we have a group of advocates joining us that can share.
Absolutely. And, if you only have 15 minutes, you want to make all of those count, right? So that's where all that extra training comes in. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking that what Melissa's and Support Fibro are doing sounds exciting, know that they also provide that training. Like they're not just going to say, okay, go meet with your senator. Good luck. I'm picturing Princess Bride, right? Good luck storming the castle. But you do give a lot of really great training that is helpful in other places too, right? Come May, Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. This is one of the questions I always ask my people before they graduate. This is part of their final. If your newspaper calls you up and says, tell us your story. We're writing an article on Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. What do we need to know about fibromyalgia? Do you know what to say?
Right. And
Yeah.
this is our elevator pitch we're always prepared for, because there's senators, there's representatives walking around Capitol Hill all the time. And you actually, I mean, we've had this instant. We were literally in an elevator and they were
I
asking
heard
us.
about this.
So this has been multiple times. So you got to get it down. Like, why are you here?
Yeah.
What is fibromyalgia? Share. Okay, we'll see you in a meeting. Here's our card. Like all this stuff, you just got to be prepared for as you're walking around, because you never know who you're going to run into. And like you said, there's press too. There's major press on site at different times as well. And even locally, there's a lot of in-district stuff that you can have meetings with your in-district reps when they're in town too. So this is all we're encouraging. And I have to get better at being a better salesman for the advocacy, because it's just, I'm learning too. And that's what people have to understand. Yeah, we're going to hold your hand through all the training, but also please understand this is a learning process. So that program actually got launched September of 2019. And many of us had never been to Capitol Hill before, including
Mm-hmm.
myself. We had never done this before. We had no training. There was no mentorship. We had Looms for Lupus join us who had more experience and kind of helped us, but this wasn't like a vast developed program. And we've been slowly developing it and training and learning all these keywords like appropriations request. You got to fill this out. What is this? What is that? So we're learning too with you. That's why we don't feel like we're just going to toss you in the deep end and leave you there. This is definitely a group effort. This is grassroots. We don't have a lobby firm behind us like some of the other organizations do that have a dedicated person doing advocacy. So this is all grassroots. You're with us. We're there with you in the meetings. We're doing it. We're stuffing folders the night before, like everything you can think of for grassroots movement. This is what we're doing.
And I think that's such an important point, because there are so many big organizations that are fighting for things that are actually at odds with our needs. And the big one that I'm thinking of is all the war against opioids, right? There are a lot of pain patients that have suffered because of that. And the pain patient voice isn't being heard enough as part of that conversation, right? So it is important that we as patients get involved, and that this is a grassroots effort, because it's us doing it, right? It's our lives, it's our needs.
And it affects everybody in the community. And I know not everyone can attend. There's a lot, it's a physical barrier, it's a investment financially. So that's why we try to open up hybrid, so virtually meeting with reps. But all of this does make a difference. And even with advocacy for certain specialties. I'm a huge fan of naturopathic doctors, and their scope of practice is limited in different states. And I
Yes, it
really
is.
do
Yep.
feel that they have a path forward for fibromyalgia better than some specialties, but they're challenged with advocacy. So we've gotten involved with even advocating for their advancement of scope to help patients as well. So there's a lot of advocacy that can be done in different levels, and supporting each other is huge. And it all comes back to the patients. So patient-centered care, we need to make those changes. We need to know that it does matter and your voice does make a difference.
It does. It does. One of the things that Melissa and I have been, Melissa and I, because Melissa Swanson is also involved in this, but we've been working to try to get governor proclamations for Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. May is Awareness Month for fibromyalgia. To get those proclamations from our governors, we're trying to get all 50 states. We're not going to, because I actually just yesterday got the no from Washington. But this is part of that advocacy work. I mean, people have asked me, what does getting a proclamation do? In the long run, it might look like it does nothing. It's just a piece of paper, but it does make those people more aware of fibromyalgia, right? Like it's on their radar. It also brings, I think, a certain amount of legitimacy to certain people, right? It's kind of like seeing those drug commercials on TV, right? It's like, oh, if there's a commercial, if there's a medication and a commercial for that, then it must be a real thing.
I it's important and not to discount that's an advocacy work in itself for awareness because proclamations, if you're going for your mayor, the city, or the governor state level, it creates awareness. So it not only lets patients know there are other people out there, we're not alone in this. And then it does give recognition to our representatives. So we were fortunate last year to get a congressional record from Representative Cartwright in Pennsylvania, which is actually, if you go to congress.gov, you type in that, it'll show up. And we used this in our meetings. So this validates, oh, you are doing work to get this done. And that's part of the process. So collectively, it means that we are a community coming together, which we really need to do. I can't emphasize that enough for fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
Please, let's come together. Let's work together because there is hope. We can do this and we can create change. So this means we're unified in our efforts. We're creating proclamations at state levels. So we're unified. There's a lot of us, which we know there are. There are millions of us all over the country. And so we're working together. We're creating that awareness so other people know they're also not alone. It's just all encompassing for what proclamations mean. And that's why we don't discount them. We continue every year. And I'm totally riding on the month. We got to do Fibromyalgia Awareness Month. We can do like World Fibromyalgia Day. I know I've gotten pushback on the month, but there's so many people, they just have the month. Why can't we take the month? It's much more like we have the whole year of
Yeah.
managing fibromyalgia. So can we please have the month at least to turn everything purple?
Right, right, right. Like, I mean, Chronic Pain Awareness Month in September, right? So, yeah, I think that's great. And then the point that you make too about how these things are sort of evidence of us being a group of people coming together. I imagine that really matters when it comes to, people deciding where to spend the money, right? Because if you just have some random person with a condition come tell you we need more research, that's a very different thing than a community of people coming to you and saying we need more money for research, right? Like, as you're thinking about where that money's going to go, are you going to help the individual or are you going to help the group? You're probably going to help the group, right?
Correct. And I talk about this a lot with thinking about shareholders. You're never going to make a pitch for funding and be wishy-washy because you're never going to get funded. If you're like, well, it's a collection, I don't know what fibromyalgia is. So we're being really definitive. We're being organized. We're showing that we're a lot of us joining together. And like you just said, it makes a difference because it's for the collective whole that we're fighting for. And that matters to different stakeholders in this industry because they're making an investment. They want to know that, in the end of the day, like we're going to be invested all the way. There's multiple people involved. And so that does make a difference for the investment in funding for research. We see it a lot at the NIH. They keep asking, well, how many members? And this is where the challenge is because everybody keeps asking us about surveillance data for their states. And like, it's with the arthritis data. So we have to tease it out. And now they're recognizing that and like, oh, Well, then it's much larger. So, how do we make this claim when everybody is asking us for that type of information? So, collectively, if we look, we're organized and we rally together, this makes a huge difference.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And what would you say to the people who are out there thinking it looks like nothing's happening? Right? Because this is a long game, right? So like we're not seeing it in the doctor's office yet. But what would you say to those people who are thinking, but I don't see anything changing?
Well, first, for anyone that's really struggling, I want to make sure that people know do not give up. There is a lot of fight. Like, we're in the back here just trying to do what we can. And I know there's limitations to reaching a bunch of people on social media. I wish we had a wider reach at this point, but we're doing what we can. We are all coming together and we need to continue as different organizations, different advocates. We need to join forces to make it louder than ever before. But as someone that was bedbound and really in a tremendous amount of pain for many, many years, I know how defeated it can be. And so that's why I want to make sure that people understand the work is getting done. There's a group of us out there that are looking for this transformative change, and we're not going to give up. I mean, I tell people this is my bucket list. This is the one thing I have left to do on this planet. So I'm all in for everybody. And I'm really focused on what we need to change and trying to find other people that are willing to make this change. Because I tell people I can't do this alone, and one organization can't do this alone. We're
Correct,
going to
yeah.
have to join and team up and try to strategize and play to our strengths because there's areas that I'm not great at. And working with other people who are, you fill in the gaps, and it's a team effort to make this type of change.
Absolutely. And you and I have talked about that too, right? Like if I'm out there, I'm training coaches, I'm training people to help fibromyalgia patients. Well, let's utilize them then for getting those governor proclamations, for other advocacy work, right? Because this is we all have sort of our role to play. You and I and Dr. Ginevra have talked about that, right? Like the doctor education, the advocacy, the patient education, support groups, like these are all areas that our community needs, and no one person can do all of that.
Absolutely. And I know I'm going to maybe potentially change rules and how to figure out how to do that. But I really want to push the system to be kind of rebellious in the diagnostic criteria to change really the pathway for this education of what we need. And eventually, because I think people, there's a misunderstanding. There isn't a fibromyalgia specialty in a traditional sense. So there again, there's subsets of doctors that have their training and mythology of how they approach fibromyalgia, and they provide that training to other medical providers, but in a traditional sense. So again, what I'm trying to do going into this nursing side potentially, I'm crossing fingers everything works out, is pushing that because we can pull in from other specialties just like other conditions have done. They take from neurology, they take from rheumatology, and they start to develop more advanced fellowship programs for fibromyalgia specifically. That hasn't been done, so we have our eye on that. I'm not an MD, so the challenge is much greater. The barrier to entry is going to be really challenging, but that's why I'm surfacing through as right now as a health coach trying to find those medical providers. They're out there. They're out there from neurology, they're out there from rheumatology, naturopathic medicine, chiropractic. So there's these subsets that are ready to learn. So let's bring them in and let's support their community of development too. So there's a lot going on in my head.
Right, right, exactly. And you like there aren't enough hours and minutes in the day for you to literally do it all, right? Just I mean, for any of us, there is not. Like there's a limit to our time, to our energy, fibro or not, right? Like we only have so much, which means we need you listening to help with this. You know, if you have fibromyalgia, you have a stake in this. You have a stake in what's going to happen, and not just for you, but for like future generations of people with fibromyalgia. Maybe they can not go through what you went through to finally get a diagnosis and finally get some treatment. Or maybe you're still struggling to find treatment, right? You don't want that for somebody else. So these are all very practical ways that help. They might not seem like they are changing anything, but this is a long, long, long game. And with the help of people like Melissa with Support Fibro, we can actually start to make some change. So thank you so much for what you're doing. If I haven't said that recently, I'm so happy that you guys are out there doing that, because I it's not my thing. It's not my. I have all this other stuff that's on my list.
Well, the challenge is because it just affects everything coming in, and
It
how do
does.
we create that change and getting people involved? And I hope we haven't overwhelmed people with getting involved. This is the challenge when we talk about the larger scope. And I know
Yeah.
people like Brandy try to rope me in because they're like, it's such a big plan, Mel. But we need like small goals, or how to help people feel better, like all of those things. Okay, day-to-day operations, I know, and there's people out there, and we do some of that with supporting other people, but then like there's the other side of it, the larger scale systemic changes, so we need
Yes,
help
and we
with
need
that.
people with your vision to go after that too. I think especially with our community, because so many of us are just trying to get through the day, right? We can't think about 20 years down the road. We can barely think about tomorrow, right? So we need that vision, but we also need those fibro-friendly bite-sized pieces. So for the person listening who is like, okay, I'm in. What's that fibro-friendly bite-sized piece that I can take today? What have you got?
Well, I think it's embracing all this health coaching and lifestyle modifications and things for life education, educating yourself. Right now, we're doing both. So we're helping patients understand and get the education in your hands, for various things. There are treatments out there, there are things to know about and understand, and embrace it and try new things. Because again, it's layering different modalities on
Yes, it
top of
is.
each other. There isn't just one thing that all of us found, and we're each unique too in what works, what doesn't work. And that's why we have to be open to being experiment. This is on us right now in our laps to change, but we can. If we're motivated to do this change, it can. And little things that I talk about with people, because being bedbound, I could not go and do this 10,000 steps thing. So I threw that out the window. But I made changes, and my bias has become nutrition, because what I did was just go to the kitchen. I can throw stuff in a blender and make stuff. So small changes do make a difference, but layering different aspects and different tools. And I know Tami has a book with a lot of these tools.
Yep.
I'm eventually going to drop a book with some additional tools in the biohacking world, because people ask me what I use. So all of this, and education is going to be a huge component of this. We'll be working the long game behind the scenes, but there are tools and stuff available right now that people can incorporate into their lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that really is like the first step we all need to take is with us, right? We can't go out and change the world if we don't start here, right? Because we have to be well enough to be able to go out and change the world. Not to say that there aren't things that you can do if you're not totally well yet. That's fine. There's lots of things you can do, but don't don't miss that step. There are so many things that can be done to improve fibromyalgia symptoms. I'm actually going to be publishing an article on our results with the advisor class. Our students on average improve about 50% in 3 months, which is significant. And that needs to be like, that's part of that research that needs to be out there, that people are getting better. Even just that message, there are people who get better with fibromyalgia. It's not just one, long, you know, fade.
Well, and slowly improving quality of life. That's
Yeah.
huge. And just being able to maybe do laundry, to be able to
Yeah.
cook or go to the grocery store. We're not talking about strides of huge things, but these small steps, and they do make a difference and they do help you feel motivated to do more things. And we want people to be happy. I mean, one thing I talk about too with movement is play. It's okay to
Yes.
go play with your dog, roll around a little bit. I love that aspect of movement, dance, have fun, find things that bring you joy. I know you were the first one that kind of introduced this joy, bringing joy into your life, and it's been
Yeah.
repetitive. It's been added into the other health coaching training I've had, is what brings you joy. And think about that in these aspects. And so, all components of life and what you do for these lifestyle mechanisms. And, a lot of us love our furry friends. So enjoy time with them, spend that time, and just small steps do make a huge difference.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And you just keep adding them together, right? Little bit adds up to a big bit over time. So,
Yeah, and try new things and be open-minded too. And I'm going to be honest, your doctor may not be the one that'll tell you this stuff, but there's different healthcare professionals out there. I have a newfound appreciation for OTs more than ever. I got a
mhm.
chance to speak at some of the occupational therapy graduate school programs and learned what they're really about and what they can do. I mean, we talk a lot about physical therapists, but OTs can help
Yeah.
us with this extra training, walking correctly, making preventions of falls. And I see all these social media like gadgets and tools we might be able to use in the kitchen that don't like hurt our, if we're struggling to open a jar because we have no strength, there's other tools that can help us. And using those tools to help prevent pain is huge. So there's a lot of great information out there. There's other allied professionals to look at for providing insights.
hmm And I think, something you said earlier, I think is really important that goes with this. You're never going to find one magic pill. You're never going to find one magic provider. It will take a team. It will take what I call the shotgun approach, which just means it'll take a lot of little things working together to hit the target. But you can absolutely get there. You just have to broaden your horizons, open up to the possibility that it's going to take adding somebody new to your healthcare team or replacing somebody on your healthcare team or trying new things that maybe seem weird to you. Right? Like there's a lot of therapies out there that things like emotional freedom technique, tapping, EFT, like might seem a little bit weird. There's actually science behind it. These are things to be willing to try and figure out what is going to work for you, and it might not be the thing you think it's going to be.
I know, and seeing what we can do to make different investments. I mean, there's a lot of free information too. There's a lot of free tools that you can use daily in practices, but I've been even impressed on the learning scope because I was using myofascial technique with a professional that I would go to, but I recently learned that you can do stuff on yourself at home. So
Yeah.
this has been helpful with like learning those techniques and things to try to prevent some of the pain that comes up with the fascia. So there's a lot of tools out there that people can use and incorporate still.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for being here. What is next on the Support Fibro calendar? What are you guys working on now?
We're setting up more interviews. I know we did our fibromyalgia conference and we do it all live, but we're going to be doing some interviews with people because we've had some requests from last year that didn't make it in. So we're going to be doing that for May. We're going to continue this advocacy follow up because we did submit appropriations requests. Now you got to follow up. Now you got to keep in tune with them and keep
Squeaky
asking.
wheel, right? Squeaky wheel gets the funding.
We are reaching out to more researchers. We're going to be doing interviews with them. We are involved too with the NIH heavily, with the NINDS nonprofit forum. The pain consortium is coming up. So we have our eyes on still the public health agencies to do that work. And then again, we're always supporting May initiatives. So if you have an event or if you have a support group, please let us know. I'm working on the website. We had a WordPress catastrophe because a
Oh
plugin
gosh.
updated while I was on the road. But it's good because now we can add. So if people have support groups that they want to get listed, we're at creating that database. We're going to be updating some medical providers that we did meet at ACR last year that are open to actually working with fibromyalgia patients. There's some that have some new clinics. So we're working on that database too. So there's going to be a lot of updates to the website, a lot of updates to video content coming up in May.
Awesome. I love that. And where will people find the video content? Will that be on your website or social media?
Supportfibro.org, but we do post a lot of content on social media. YouTube, we're growing our channel. That has been huge. But we have a big following on Facebook, and we're always trying to get messages and weed through spam right now. So I ask for
Right.
your patience because there just seems to be a lot of that happening with spammy comments. But it's just creating content, that educational material. Keep pushing out education so patients always have that resource for them, and then continuing to incorporate and build relationships with these interviews with the medical providers and with the researchers, because I want people to know that there are medical providers who care. There's MDs, NDs, chiropractors, all encompassing different specialties as well, and how to utilize those specialties in your healthcare team.
Perfect. Perfect. I love it. So,
And health
if you,
coaches, by the way.
yeah, yeah, as you
I
and I are
forget
both
my,
coaches, let's not forget that.
I forget my own specialty. Yeah. So health coaches. So we want to do some more interviews with health coaches as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think it's so many of us. I mean, I know it's where I was when I was first diagnosed. Like, all we know is our traditional Western medicine, right? You go to the doctor, you get your antibiotics, you get your bones set. Like this is what we know of medicine, but it's so much bigger than that, and there are so many more types of providers, modalities, therapies. There are just so many other things. So I think it's great you're doing those interviews because that'll kind of open people up, give people, access to learning about some of those other things. That's awesome.
Well, and I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but just to understand like the health coaching benefit and something I didn't know, because in some of the trainings they're like, that's not health coaching. But the benefit of the health coach is the education piece that you can support with the patient education piece and the coaching. But we're the patient advocates. We have the lived experience usually, and we've transitioned in health coaching. So we understand that component. And as we talked about advocacy, healthcare advocacy in the clinic, this is that game changer that has really helped. And I know when I first started training in some of these sectors, they're like, but patient advocacy isn't health coaching. But it really is a big, huge part of it. And when you see that you can help people advocate for themselves in a lot of the group work that I've done and be like, okay, so this is how you can transition. This is, and then I can help talk to the physician too. That's
Yep.
huge. And that's a game changer for health coaching.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. There have been many times where I've talked to a client's provider because I'm seeing the client an hour a week, right? Actually am spending more time with my client than they are. So I can have insights to share with them. Not to mention, like you said, just that lived in experience. So for you listening, if you were to work with a certified fibromyalgia coach, you are working with somebody who has fibromyalgia, right? Like there's nothing like being able to talk to somebody who, when they answer the phone and say, how did this week go? And you say, not great. That's kind of all you need to say. Like, we know. Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up. And then teaching people how to advocate for themselves, like us advocating for them, but also then by extension, teaching them, modeling for them what advocacy looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know that I tended to attract people that had come from they have multiple doctors they're running, and they have, like, all these blood tests and don't know what to do with it. So we're trying to
Yeah.
hone them in the very beginning to get really organized and be like, okay, these are some of the questions to go into your session with. This is how to organize it. This is what you're saying is predominantly your symptoms. So you can outline it better. And this is the growth and I guess the great part of being a health coach in those
Mhm.
settings.
Yes. And I love helping my clients get prepared for their doctor visits, right? Just thinking back to when I was going through that and how I would have like 2 pages of questions I would want to ask, right? All these things I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to change the world in one 15-minute appointment, right? And to be able to work with our clients to distill that down. What are the most important things? What are the things that we need to have when we leave that office? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then implementing that information afterwards, right? Because how many times have you left a doctor's office and thought, okay, but how am I going to do that? Right? Whether it's going gluten free or doing your PT exercises, right? The implementation of that can sometimes be difficult. And so, helping our clients then implement that. Every doctor should have their patients working with a health coach because the doctor can't do that implementation part with their clients. The system is not set up that way to allow
Right.
that to happen. Yeah.
And that's the benefit of a health coach too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you again for being here. Any last minute thoughts? Anything you want to share with the folks listening?
I think this is a call to action for us to join together, work together, community, organizations, other advocates out there. Please, let's just come together as a huge community and rally, and we will make the changes. So I strongly believe that changes are on the way and they're happening, and eventually we will get there if we can all come together.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And do you guys have an email list, or is following you on social media the best way to stay in touch with what you're up to?
We do have an email newsletter that we are producing and we send out as something I need to get better. I think once a month is basically what you'll hear. A lot of it does show up like immediately on social media though. So follow us on social media.
Yes, same here. I could duplicate that. Of course, this podcast, anything that I'm aware of, I will absolutely share with all of you ways to get involved. But follow us on social media. That's the best way to get the most quickest up to date
And quickest
information.
response too, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you again for being here. And for you listening, stay tuned. There's a couple of things we talked about today that relate to a couple of other podcast episodes. So I'll list those. Just stay tuned. I'll have those for you in just a minute.
thank you.
And that wraps up my interview with Melissa Talwar, Executive Director of the Support Fibromyalgia Network. To learn more about their advocacy work or to join their next Advocacy Day, be sure to follow Support Fibro on social media or join that email list. We'll have the links to where you can connect with Support Fibro in today's show notes. Just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/132. And if you'd like to learn more about working with a coach beyond the benefits that Melissa and I just discussed, consider scheduling a consultation with a certified fibromyalgia coach or student coach in training. Remember, we have fibromyalgia too, and we found ways to feel better. In addition to helping you prepare for your doctor visits, we can give you tips and tricks from our own lives. Plus, there's nothing like talking to somebody who truly understands you and has walked in your shoes. Just visit findafibrocoach.com to schedule online. If you're interested in learning more about the latest fibromyalgia research and why we need funding, here are those other episodes I mentioned for you. Episode 21, Cutting Edge Research on Fibromyalgia with Dr. Jared Younger. In this episode, Dr. Younger talks about his research with brain imaging, looking at brain inflammation. He talks a little bit about low-dose naltrexone and some of the research he's currently conducting. Episode 105, Talk to Your Doctor Effectively with Dr. Andrea Chadwick. In addition to the topic, right, talking to your doctor effectively, we also talked about her research on hot tubs and exercise for fibromyalgia. One of the interesting things that she discovered is that sitting in a hot tub can have a similar effect to exercise for fibromyalgia, which can be both good and bad. It's an easy way to ease into exercise, but if you're overdoing it in the hot tub, your body might think you are exercising too much. So check out that episode. That is episode 105. Dr. Chadwick also talks about that funding issue and how she has kind of worked around it. So check out episode 105. Episode 110, New Medication for Fibromyalgia with Dr. Seth Lederman, is talking about a new medication Tonix Pharmaceuticals is developing. So check that one out. Episode 117 is Fibromyalgia, an Autoimmune Disorder with Dr. Ginevra. We talk about the study that was done in London looking at mouse antibodies and how they have drawn the conclusion that fibromyalgia does indeed have an autoimmune component. You can learn more about that in episode 117. Episode 131, our last episode, was on GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound, and that episode is with Dr. Isabel Amig. She is a rheumatologist, and in that episode, she discusses how these GLP-1 medications can actually help with brain inflammation, which brings us all the way back to the beginning, episode 21, Cutting Edge Research on Fibromyalgia with Dr. Jared Younger, talking about brain inflammation and why that is a factor in fibromyalgia. So those are the episodes you can check out if you're interested in more on fibromyalgia research, on funding. And if you want to learn more about what Melissa and I discussed on the importance of purposefully adding more joy to your life, check out episode 13, titled, appropriately, How to Add More Joy to Your Life. This contains some more information on that, why it's important, and a walkthrough of an activity I use with all my students and clients to help them purposefully add that joy back into their lives. Fibromyalgia can feel like such a long taking away of things that we have to purposefully add that joy back in. Otherwise, after a while, let's face it, life just isn't worth living. I mean, we need to have that joy. So go check that out in episode 13. And as I said, we will have links to all of these episodes in today's show notes. So just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/132, and that will have all the links and all the details. I have one last announcement before I share this week's listener shout out, and that is the fact that Google Podcasts has gone away. So if you're used to listening in Google Podcasts, you cannot hear me right now. It is no longer available as of the beginning of April 2024. Google is actually recommending that you use YouTube Podcasts as a replacement, and I am working on getting this podcast added there. But in the meantime, you should be able to import this show if you were subscribed to it previously in Google Podcasts. I had a listener tell me that they were able to do that, so I know it's possible. If you are just looking for a replacement, if you'd like to use a different app, these are the most popular options with my listeners: Spotify, Castbox, iHeartRadio, and Pocket Casts. We will try to have links to those in today's show notes as well, if you're not familiar with those. So Spotify, Castbox, iHeartRadio, and Pocket Casts. And now I have this week's listener shout out for you. This is an email I received from Regina, and she said, I wanted to say thank you for what you are doing. I found your podcast while at work during a flare this last week. I needed something to help guide me. I was skeptical at first because I have very little knowledge about fibromyalgia, but I have learned a lot and I am looking forward to learning more. It has been difficult learning to love and accept this new version of myself, but I am confident that I will get there. Thank you again. And thank you, Regina. Thank you so much for sending this in. I am so glad that you are finding the podcast helpful. And yes, this is 100% my goal is to give you that information, an easy way to learn more about fibromyalgia, both from a, more medical scientific perspective, which is why we do all those shows on fibromyalgia research, but also the practical, boots on the ground advice from somebody who has lived with this daily, which is why I share my experience, but we also have other people sharing their experiences, like Melissa today, who also has fibromyalgia. So we don't want you to feel you're alone. You are not alone. We don't want you to feel that way. You are not alone. And, educate you as well. As patients, we really, as Melissa and I somewhat discussed, advocacy is really important. And in order to advocate for yourself well, you also have to be educated in your illness. You also have to know yourself well. So that can sometimes be difficult, tuning back into that. But the better educated you are, the better you can advocate for your needs and for really the entire fibro community. So thank you so much for that, Regina, and everybody else. We will see you back here next time. I have a super special announcement next week for a fun new tool I have to help you better understand yourself and how fibromyalgia is unique to you. So be sure and join us next time.